Where in the world are you all watching from today? Drop it in the comments. I love seeing how far this community reaches. Okay, I need to tell you something that happened at my brother's wedding reception last September. Something I've been sitting with for months, trying to figure out how to even put into words. Because on the surface, it looked like a perfect night. Fairy lights strung across the garden, my new sister-in-law laughing in her dress, my dad giving a toast with a glass of champagne raised high. And then he said her name, my sister's name, not mine. And that was the moment I realized 3 years of my life had just been quietly, completely erased. Let me back up. My name is not important. What's important is that I'm the older one. Older than my brother by 4 years, older than my sister by 7. Growing up, that meant I was the responsible one. The one who made sure homework got done when my parents were working late. The one who learned to cook because someone had to feed us on the nights my dad came home, too tired to stand at the stove. I didn't resent it. That was just how our family worked. You pulled your weight, you showed up, and you didn't make a big deal out of it. I carried that into adulthood. When I got my first real job at 23, project coordinator at a mid-sized logistics firm, I was proud of myself. It wasn't glamorous. Long hours, a lot of spreadsheets, a lot of being the person who noticed the problems before they became disasters. But I was good at it. I saved carefully. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment that was frankly too small for me because I had other priorities. My brother, on the other hand, had always been the one with the big dreams and the loose relationship with planning. I say that with love. He's genuinely one of the warmest people I know. But he'd been with his girlfriend, Hazel, now his wife, for 5 years. And when they finally got engaged, it became very clear very quickly that the wedding they wanted and the budget they had were not living in the same universe. My parents are not wealthy. My dad drove a delivery truck for 30 years. My mom worked part-time at a pharmacy while we were growing up, then full-time after we left home. They own their house, barely, and they're comfortable enough. But comfortable doesn't mean can write a check for a wedding. The engagement happened in January. By March, my mom was stressed in a way I hadn't seen since I was a teenager. She wasn't sleeping well. She'd get quiet at strange moments during our Sunday phone calls. Finally, I asked her directly what was going on. She told me. The wedding venue they'd booked required a non-refundable deposit of $18,000 by June. My brother and Hazel had put down $5,000 from their savings. My parents had scraped together $4,000. That left $9,000 sitting between them and losing the venue entirely, and with it, the date, the deposit, and probably my sister-in-law's trust in the whole plan. I didn't hesitate. I told my mom I'd cover it. She cried a little. Told me I didn't have to. I told her I wanted to, and I meant it. My brother's happiness meant something to me. I wasn't doing it to be recognized. I was doing it because I could, and because that's what family does. But here's the thing about that's what family does. It tends to expand. 2 weeks after I transferred the $9,000, my mom called again. The catering company they'd found, the one Hazel had her heart set on, needed a 30% deposit to hold the date. Another $6,000. They were short. I sent the $6,000. Then there was the florist. Then the photographer, because the first one they'd booked suddenly wasn't available and the replacement cost more. Then the rehearsal dinner venue, because my parents had quietly promised to host that too without actually having the money to do it. By August, a full month before the wedding, I had put in $47,000. I want you to let that number sit for a second. $47,000. That was the bulk of my savings. Years of living carefully, of skipping vacations, of saying no to myself over and over again because I was trying to build something. And I gave it, piece by piece, to make sure my brother's wedding was everything he dreamed of. I didn't put it on a spreadsheet. I didn't make anyone sign anything. Each time my mom called, I just transferred the money and told her not to worry. I trusted that my family knew what I was doing. I trusted that they saw me. I should tell you about my sister. She's 7 years younger than me, which means she grew up in a different version of our family than I did. The softer version. After my dad got promoted, after things got a little easier. She's charming in the way that younger siblings can be when they've never had to be the responsible one. She shows up to things with wine and a big smile, and everyone's always glad she's there. She has a good job, makes decent money, and spends most of it on herself, which is her right. During the months I was quietly funding this wedding, my sister's contribution was helping Hazel pick out her veil and organizing the bachelorette weekend in Nashville, which again, fine. People contribute what they can. What I didn't know until much later is what she was saying behind the scenes. The wedding was beautiful. I mean that genuinely. It was one of the most beautiful evenings I've ever been part of. The venue was a restored farmhouse about an hour outside the city, with a stone courtyard and these old oak trees that had been there longer than any of us. The lights my brother had wanted, the flowers Hazel had cried over in the florist's catalog, the caterer whose food made 3 of my aunts ask for recipes. All of it came together perfectly. I sat at the family table in a blue dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion, and I felt, for most of that night, genuinely happy. Then came the toasts. My dad stood up first, the way he always does at family events. A little stiff, a little uncomfortable with public attention, but determined. He thanked Hazel's parents. He said something sweet about my brother that made my brother look at his shoes and smile. And then he said he wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the people who'd made this night possible. He looked at my sister. He said her name. He said she had gone above and beyond for this wedding. He said he didn't know what they would have done without her. He said he was proud of her. My sister beamed. She raised her glass. People at nearby tables who didn't know any better applauded. I sat very still. My mom was looking at her plate. I thought, at first, that maybe this was just an oversight, that my dad had gotten confused or was planning to mention me next, or had simply misordered his thoughts in the way that people do when they're nervous and holding a microphone. But he sat down, and he didn't say my name. My aunt leaned over to me after and said, "Your sister must have done so much to help." I smiled. I said she really loved them both. I picked up my fork and I finished my dinner, and I held everything inside with both hands. That night, I drove home alone, and I sat in my car in the parking garage of my building for about 20 minutes before I could make myself go upstairs. I want to be honest with you about what I felt because I think it matters. It wasn't just hurt. It was something more specific than that. This particular kind of pain that comes from realizing that the story people are telling about your life is completely different from the one you've been living. Like I had been in a room, doing something real, and when they described the room to other people, I wasn't in it. I called my mom the next day. I kept my voice neutral. I told her I'd had a wonderful time, that the wedding was everything we'd hoped, and then I said, I noticed Dad thanked her in his toast. There was a pause. My mom said, "She did help a lot with the planning, honey." I said, "I know she did. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page about what happened financially. The $47,000 I put in." Another pause. Longer this time. She said, "We know what you did. We're grateful." But here's the thing about gratitude that lives only in private. It doesn't leave a mark on the official record. The story my family was telling, the one my dad told in front of 120 people, was that my sister had made this wedding happen. And that story was going to travel. It was going to become the truth that people repeated. It was going to be what my nieces and nephews heard someday when someone told them about the night their parents got married. I let it go for a while, or I tried to. I went back to work. I rebuilt my savings slowly because that's what you do. I told myself it was fine, that I hadn't given the money for recognition, that the wedding had been beautiful and that was enough. And it almost worked. For about 4 months, it almost worked. For about 4 months, it almost worked. Then my mom mentioned casually during one of our Sunday calls that my dad had told the story again. At Thanksgiving at my aunt's house, apparently, he brought up the wedding and talked about how my sister had pulled everything together when things got difficult. I asked my mom if she had said anything. She said, "You know how your father gets when he's telling a story." I thought about that for a long time after we hung up. I thought about $47,000. I thought about the June morning I transferred $9,000 and felt good about it. Felt like I was doing something right. I thought about how my sister had organized a bachelorette weekend in Nashville and was now, in the version of events circulating through my extended family, the hero of my brother's wedding. And I decided I was done being quiet. Christmas was at my parents' house that year. My brother and Hazel came. My sister came with her boyfriend and several of my relatives were there. my dad's brother and his wife, two of my cousins, my maternal grandmother, who is sharp as a tack and doesn't miss anything. We were in the living room after dinner, that comfortable post-meal haze, where everyone's a little too full and a little too warm and conversation flows easily. My dad started telling a story about the wedding. I could see where it was going before he'd finished his second sentence. His face had that particular glow it gets when he's in his element. He said it had been an incredible night. He said the family had really come together. He looked at my sister and said, "And a lot of that was because of you." My sister smiled. She did this small, modest head tilt that she's very good at. "I just wanted them to have the day they deserved," she said. My grandmother looked at me. I don't know if she knew or if she just sensed something, but she looked directly at me in the moment after my sister spoke, and there was a question in her expression. I reached into my bag. I'd been carrying my phone already, but I had something else. I'd printed out a simple one-page summary, not a dramatic document, just a clean list, date, amount, purpose, $9,000 for the venue deposit, $6,000 for catering, $4,200 for the photographer, on down the list to the last transfer, made 11 days before the wedding for the remaining balance on the rehearsal dinner, total $47,260. I let my dad finish, and then very quietly I said, "Dad, I love you. Can I ask you something?" He looked at me, a little surprised at the interruption, but not alarmed. "Of course, sweetheart." I held up the paper. I said, "When you say the family came together for the wedding, whose money made it possible?" The room went very still. My dad looked at the paper. He looked at me. Something moved across his face that I hadn't seen there in a long time. Something uncertain. My sister said, "What is that?" I said calmly. "It's a record of every transfer I made to Mom's account between March and September. For the wedding." I didn't say it with anger. I want to be clear about that. I had rehearsed a version of this in my head that was accusatory and sharp, and I had decided against it. I didn't want to fight. I wanted them to see something they had been not seeing. My brother was looking between me and my sister. He said, "Wait, I didn't know. Mom told us some of it came from..." My mom said quietly. She covered most of it. That was the moment my dad's expression changed completely. Not to shame, exactly. More to that particular confusion of someone who has been telling a story with competence and has just understood that he had a fundamental fact wrong. He said, "I didn't realize the full amount." I said, "I know. I should have been clearer from the beginning, but I'd like it to be clear now." My sister said nothing. She was looking at a spot on the carpet, and for the first time in the whole evening, the modest head tilt was gone. My grandmother, from her chair by the window, said simply, "Well, now we know." There were tears at some point. My mom's, I think, though maybe mine too. My dad apologized more than once, and I believed that he meant it. My brother hugged me in the kitchen later and said he hadn't understood the scale of what I'd done, and I told him the wedding was worth it, and I meant that too. My sister and I didn't talk that night. She left before the rest of us with her boyfriend, and I watched her headlights sweep across the front window as they backed out of the driveway. We've talked since. It's careful, the way conversations are when something's been named that everyone used to pretend wasn't there. She said she didn't realize what my dad was implying with his toast. I'm still figuring out how much of that I believe. What I know for certain is this. My dad has not told that version of the story again. At Easter, when someone brought up the wedding, he said, "It was a real family effort." And then he looked at me and he said my name. That's not everything, but it was something. I used to think that doing the right thing quietly, without needing credit, was a kind of strength. And I still think there's something true in that. But I've also learned that there's a difference between not needing recognition and actively allowing yourself to be erased. One is grace. The other is just disappearing. I'm not going to disappear anymore. If you've ever been the one who made something happen while someone else got thanked, drop a comment. I read every single one. I've thought a lot about why I stayed quiet for so long, and I don't think it was weakness, exactly. I think I had confused silence with virtue. I told myself that giving without expecting recognition was the noble thing to do, and there's truth in that, up to a point. But there's a line somewhere between generosity and self-erasure, and I had crossed it without realizing, and then kept walking. The thing about doing good quietly is that it only works if the people around you are paying attention. If they're not, if they're busy constructing a version of events that conveniently centers someone else, your silence doesn't read as grace. It reads as absence, and absence over time becomes the official story. That's what happened to me. Not because my dad is a cruel man. He isn't. He loves his children genuinely and imperfectly, the way most parents do. But he had been handed a narrative, probably built slowly, casually, through my sister's presence at planning meetings and her name attached to things I'd funded. And he repeated it because no one had ever handed him the other one. I had given him 47,000 reasons to know the truth, and not one of them came with a label. That was on me. I see that now. What I've come to understand is that integrity isn't just about doing the right thing. It's also about being honest enough to let the record reflect what actually happened. There's nothing noble about funding someone else's hero story with your own sacrifice. That's not virtue. That's just disappearing in slow motion. The intelligence piece took me longer to accept. I'm not someone who avoids hard conversations because I don't know how to have them. I avoided this one because I was afraid of what it would cost. The discomfort at the table, the possibility that speaking up would make me look small even as I tried to stand taller. I miscalculated. Staying quiet made me smaller. Bringing the paper to Christmas dinner, saying my piece without shouting, and letting the silence after do its work. That was the smarter move. It just took me 9 months to get there. And the resilience part, that's the one I'm still working on. Because even after that night, even after my dad apologized and my brother hugged me in the kitchen and my grandmother said, well, now we know, with that particular finality she has, I still had to go home alone and sit with the fact that it had taken all of that to be seen. That kind of thing leaves a mark. You don't just shake it off because it ended okay. What I keep coming back to is this. The people who took the most from me in this story weren't doing it with malice. They were doing it with inattention. And inattention, I've decided, is something I'm no longer going to accommodate with my silence. I still paid for that wedding. I don't regret it. My brother and Hazel had a beautiful night, and they're building a good life, and I love them both. But I will never again let $47,000, or $47, or 47 minutes of my time disappear into someone else's story without at least making sure the record is clear. You don't have to be loud to be counted, but you do have to speak.